It was a summer day unlike any other in Bushey, Hertfordshire, on July 9, 2024, when the Hunt family's peaceful life was shattered by a brutal attack that would horrify a nation. At the center of it was Kyle Marcus Clifford, then 26 years old, a former soldier turned murderer, who would go on to commit one of the most shocking domestic killings in recent UK history. He would not simply attack his ex-girlfriend, he would kill her and two of her family in a crime so calculated, so violent, that the whole country would struggle to understand what drove a man to destroy those closest to him. Louise Hunt, aged 25, had ended an 18-month relationship with Clifford in June 2024. The split was difficult for both, but for Louise especially there was relief. She lived with her sister Hannah, 28, and their mother Carol, 61, in a home in Ashland Close, Bushey. Their father, John Hunt, a well-known BBC and Sky Sports racing commentator, had always been proud of his wife and daughters, Carol, warm and caring, Hannah, strong and witty, Louise, compassionate and determined. They were a close family. In the days before the attack, Clifford began preparing. He bought a compound crossbow and bolts, a butcher's knife, and other equipment. He searched for content online about radical misogynistic views, and apparently consumed media that fueled anger and resentment. The authorities later revealed that less than 24 hours before the murders, Clifford had even searched for a podcast associated with the controversial influencer Andrew Tate, whose content was later cited in court as part of the motivational background for the crime. On the afternoon of July 9, Clifford drove to the Hunt home under false pretexts. He rang Carol's door, claiming he was returning belongings that supposedly belonged to Louise. When Carol answered, he concealed the knife, stabbed her repeatedly, killing her in that moment. Then, he left briefly to retrieve the crossbow from his car, which he used strategically to wait for Hannah and Louise. Moments later, Louise, unaware of what had occurred, was restrained, raped, and shot in the back with the crossbow. Hannah, returning from work, discovered the carnage, and Clifford shot her too. The sisters' final attempts to call for help were valiant but tragically in vain. A manhunt followed. Clifford fled, badly injured, and was later found in Lavender Hill Cemetery in Enfield, North London. He had shot himself in the chest with the crossbow, leaving him paralyzed from the waist down. He was discovered by police after many hours, the weapon in his possession, the horror of his actions revealed fully by forensic evidence, CCTV footage, and a careful reconstruction of his movements before and after the killings. As the news broke, the UK public faced shock, grief, and confusion. How could someone planning such violence be someone known, someone in a relationship? How could targets be family? Social media lit up with condemnation. News outlets picked up every detail, the timeline of the afternoon, the weapons, his online searches, his military service, the betrayal felt by Louise, Hannah, and Carol's friends and colleagues. Comments spoke of misogyny, obsession, the toxicity of social media and radicalizing voices. The legal case against Kyle Clifford moved steadily toward resolution. He eventually pleaded guilty to 3 counts of murder, false imprisonment, and possession of a crossbow and a butcher's knife. A separate charge of rape, relating to Louise, went to trial. The prosecution would argue that Clifford had carefully planned every detail, acquiring the weapons, studying his victims' routines, gaining access to the home under the guise of returning property, lying to Carol, then using the crossbow for execution. The defense tried to argue questions of intent and possible diminished responsibility. They challenged some of the evidence about how premeditated the attack was, or whether Clifford's mindset was influenced by relationship breakdown and emotional distress. In December 2024, the rape trial proceeded. A jury heard evidence, CCTV, messages, forensic traces, and in particular, evidence that Louise had been bound, restrained, and then raped. The courtroom was heavy. Louise's father John Hunt, her sister Amy, and Hannah's partner watched on. The prosecution painted Clifford as a man whose anger had turned violent, whose pride could not accept the end of a relationship, whose planning had been methodical. For Clifford, the defense sought to show disarray, remorse, mental imbalance. But the weight of the evidence was too great. When sentencing came in March 2025 at Cambridge Crown Court, the verdict was emphatic. Kyle Clifford received a whole life order, meaning he will never be released. Justice Joel Ben Nathan called him a jealous man soaked in self-pity who held women in utter contempt. The court heard that he had spent days planning, knowing Carol would be at home, knowing Louise's schedule, knowing exactly how to deceive. Louise's father, John Hunt, delivered one of the most powerful victim impact statements in recent memory. He spoke of his daughters, their personalities, their lives cut short. He spoke of anger and love, grief and resolve. He said their home was supposed to be a safe place, that Clifford had violated that safety with cold brutality. Carol, Hannah and Louise Hunt left behind memories of kindness, laughter, ambition. Louise had just ended the relationship, Hannah was working, Carol was caring, devoted. Amy, the eldest daughter, was tasked with mourning, with being the voice for two sisters and her mother. The impact on John Hunt was searing. He described his grief as indescribable, saying that 3/4 of his family had been stolen away in one act. The judge agreed that this crime was not one of mere passion but one of thought, rage, misogyny, calculated violence. Public reaction included calls for stronger Crossbow controls. The Home Secretary and lawmakers began reviewing laws around weapons like crossbows, both ownership and regulation. Many commentators spoke of spurned lover motives, toxic masculinity, radicalization, misogyny. Online forums scrutinized how social media influencer content can inflame anger. Others discussed mental health, or how a man formerly in the military could carry out such a crime in what appeared to be a fit and normal life. The case became a tragic lesson in vulnerability and warning signs. Friends of Clifford reportedly saw his anger escalating, his obsession growing. Louise had been ending the relationship repeatedly, neighbors had glimpses of troubled interactions. But no one foresaw death. CCTV and phone records revealed his movements, forensic pathologists testified on crossbow bolts and wounds, doctors described injuries inconsistent with a struggle. The legal verdict declared him guilty, not simply of murder, but of systematic brutality. In the courtroom, the judge stressed that this was a crime that demanded the harshest penalty. And so Clifford received the whole life order, never to be freed. The sentence reflected not only the lives lost but the betrayal of trust, the misuse of weapons, and the premeditated nature of the violence. Now in prison, Kyle Clifford is paralyzed from the waist down, a consequence of his own self-harm after the murders. He refused to attend the sentencing in person. In his absence, supporters of the family cried out for justice. In a UK shaken by this crime, many see his fate as sealed, no release, no parole, no possibility of redemption in the eyes of the law. The Hunt family murders stand as a dark, haunting marker in recent UK criminal history, an exploration of how jealousy, obsession and anger, when magnified by weapons and misinformation, can become lethal. They force society to ask tough questions, about access to lethal weapons, about mental state, about respect, about how society responds to toxic relationships before they escalate. Louise, Hannah, Carol, their names now echo in memorials, in courtrooms, in discussions of what family means, and how love can be betrayed. The tragedy exposed legal, social and cultural fissures, law around weapons, trauma in broken relationships, misogyny online. And their memory, though stolen so violently, lives on through calls for justice, reform, and remembrance.